Chapter 84. You've arrived at your destination. Summary. The exam begins. Izuku's moves were more fluent than ever as he checked the systems of the ship. The training he'd already undergone with Weddle, the whole field sentient from when they first arrived on the base, was already showing itself. Who knew actually being taught how to fly it and manage a ship would make you better at it? They'd been flying for a few hours and were just about to approach their target. Huge floating rocks passed them by as they made their way through the asteroid belt the villains had hidden in. It wasn't all that bad navigating at their slow pace, but Izuku could see why this was where the villains parked their ship. Only an expert could chase them through this hazardous maze, but even a beginner like him and Denki could manage their slow stalk. They were getting closer and closer, meaning in just a few minutes, their final exam would really start. Being paired up with professionals in the field? Is being a pirate a field of work? Yeah, probably. Well, being paired up like this reminded Izuku of work studies. He really hoped this went better than his work study. He and Ochako were going to be sent in as the initial wave, sneaking into and around the ship for as long as possible. Ochako was paired with Kole, though Izuku wasn't sure how the fiery sentient was the group's resident stealth expert. He was paired up with Moyus, the toxin specialist of the group. Her expertise mainly stemmed from the poison her own body produced, seas of toxic blue splotched against her brown, flaky skin. They hadn't seen much of the poisonous sentient during their studies, other than them briefly going over food safety. Briefly because when you can eat lethal poisons, not much else can hurt you. There ended up being only a handful of things they couldn't eat, half consisting of the most toxic substances known to the universe, and half consisting of rare foods that almost every species could eat. Everyone except Terrans. A hand patted his shoulder. "We've arrived. You can take your spot at the controls. You and I need to get ready to infiltrate," Moyue announced. The gold threaded through her dreadlocks sparkled as she turned away, expecting Izuku to follow. He did, scooting to the edge of the large seat and slipping down onto the floor. He followed her to the back wall of the control room, lined with extra supplies and gear the pirate crew used. Ochako bounded up beside him, smiling so brightly it would be a crime not to return the expression with just as much enthusiasm. "Okay, last-minute equipment check," Kole said, helmet in her grasp. Izuku nodded, hands coming up to check his mouthguard / collapsible space helmet was there. Next, he tugged on his shield to ensure it was secure, then secured his goggles on his head, and so on, until he was sure everything was in place. Similarly, Moyue ran her thin fingers across her gear, taking special care to inspect the litany of darts stashed on her figure. Senyu had told the teens about how the darts Moyue used in combat were laced with her own poison. They weren't lethal, but they would cause partial paralysis after a few minutes, and leave a blue and white ringed rash for a few days. "You know," Ochako muses, "in all the fairy tales, the one who rescues the princess gets a kiss at the end. Do you think it's the same for space princesses?" "No fair!" Denki whined from his seat. "I want to kiss a princess!" Ochako sticks her tongue out at him with a smirk. "We're almost in range," Hugh interrupts. Moyue strides forward, slipping their inky black helmet over their head. "Helmets on. Let's get on that ship." Izuku glances over to Ochako, only to find her already looking at him, familiar spark of determination in her eyes. They've got this. They'll save the princess and show their mentors what they can offer to the guild. With a click, Izuku's helmet unfolds, securing his head from the outside world and sealing his spacesuit. The world inside is a little muffled, despite their systems in place to let sound filter in. "Izuku? Ochako? Can you hear me?" Kole asks, upbeat voice carrying through their comms. Izuku gave a thumbs up, Ochako following suit a beat behind. It hadn't been hard to switch their comms over to the pirate crew's own embedded comms, with Senyu's help, of course. "We're in range to disembark. Airlock. Now," Moyue orders, leading the way down the halls and towards, presumably, the ship's airlock. The brown and blue sentient stops at a thick door on the left, and with a coded input to the keypad, It opens. Much like the airlock on their own ship, in front of them is a small room with an even more heavy-duty door on the other side. A small strip of glass reveals the asteroid-littered space outside. They were going for a stealthy infiltration, using the floating boulders for cover. They'd get in close before making their own entrance onto the ship. Apparently, Hiono-Chako had been dubbed the most stealthy and therefore the most suited for this phase of the operation. The best of the worst. It's not that they were bad, per se, but none of their group really screamed stealth. Well, he'd seen Denki literally yell, "Stealth!" when he was supposed to have been sneaking in a training exercise back on Earth once, but that was exactly the point. Stealth was not any of their forte. Running and hiding from bullies could only teach you so much. Izuku felt a fleeting bolt of panic squeeze through his bones when the outer airlock opened, exposing them to the unfathomably infinite expanse of stars. Familiar weightlessness took his body in its grasp, lifting him from the ground with invisible hands and suspending him just like the asteroids outside of his reach. He realizes then that this is his first time in space, out in the void with nothing but the suit on his back and the helmet cradling his skull. Fingers twine in his, lacking the familiar warmth that came with having another person near. He looked up to lock gazes with Ochako. So many different things were colliding between those brown eyes, like galaxies meeting in the vast emptiness. Wonder, fear, excitement, confidence, uneasiness, loneliness. It all spilled out into the infinite expanse all around them. Just something about being a little speck in all that nothingness. He squeezed her hand and turned his gaze back to their target. They had a mission to do. Their hands didn't separate as they activated the propulsion in their suits. Kole and Moyue fitted either side, clearly more comfortable in the void than them. At this point, it wasn't second nature, but it didn't feel like he was a baby deer trying to walk for the first time, so he counted that as a win. The closer the enemy ship loomed, the slower they crept forward. It's a huge thing, probably able to fit dozens of people for long periods of time. The hull is a dull gray, like an axe that's lost its shine. There aren't any windows other than a large clear panel at the front of the ship, perfect for their plan. It doesn't take long until they position themselves at the stern, thank you, crime lessons, of the ship, completely out of sight from any passengers on board. If it's felt aboard the ship, no one questions the small impact along its side. It's to be expected in an asteroid field. Izuku, on the other hand, is blushing wildly from where he accidentally propelled himself against the ship. Not baby deer level, but clearly not great. Kole shakes her head with a smile, while she loosens the plasma cutter from its holster on her side. Sunyu's voice sounding a quick, "You're good to go," over the comms. The tip burns blue as it cuts through the thick outer hull of the vessel. Moyue, on the other hand, flicks their fingers against their helmet. "Be careful. There are lives on the line." Izuku's flush deepens, tinted with shame. He couldn't afford to mess this up before they really started. No more stupid mistakes. Turns out a bit of the wall Kole was cutting through wasn't a wall at all, as Izuku slipped through the hole into the side of the ship after Moyue. He found himself floating in an airlock. As Ochako made her way in, Izuku listened, straining his ears to pick up any blaring alarms giving away their arrival. But it seemed whatever Sunyu had done worked. "Ochako, would you like to do the honors?" Kole asked, holding a small object reminiscent of a grenade in her hands. Ochako beamed. "Of course." With care, she took the device, pressed a button on the side, and chucked it at the yawning hole. Despite knowing what was going to happen, Izuku still jolted when lime-green foam rapidly expanded from the impact site, sealing the hole in a split second. The outer hull of most ships had a similar substance tucked away in their walls, ready to seal any tear in the careful bubble keeping air in and space out. "Izuku, you're up," Moyue ordered, dragging Izuku out of his thoughts. "Right," he said, floating over to the airlock's control panel. There was only so much Sunyu and Mei could do without a direct link to the ship and its systems. The metal cover gave way under lightning-wreathed hands, exposing the inner wiring of the ship. Izuku reached into his pocket, pulling out a little device he didn't exactly understand. All he knew was that it would give the two tech geniuses the next best connection than being physically in the ship. The group of 4 knew it had worked when gravity abruptly returned to their little room. A last-minute tug on float was the only reason Izuku wasn't splayed out on the ground in front of the others. "Remember, we want to go undetected for as long as possible," Moyue said, voice stern. "You got it," Ochako replied, a determined look settling on her features. Izuku nodded. "They won't know we're here until it's too late."